I see you, I hear you, and I understand you. Okay, I see you, I hear you, I understand you. Now, what's interesting about this, Sam, is there's this research I sometimes refer to where this came out of I believe it was FP Canada. I hope I'm quoting that right. But they interviewed financial planners and their clients, so the same group, and they asked them the question: do you do this with your client? Do you base their financial plans on their values, goals, et cetera? It was all kind of the human side stuff of this. And the advisor said, yes, we do, at about 90%, and the client said, no, you don't.
You're listening to The Uncertainty Edge, the show about the art and science of moving forward when the path isn't clear. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan. Each episode, I sit down with leaders, advisors, and thinkers to explore how they navigate uncertainty, make better decisions, and stay focused in a world that rarely cooperates. Together, we'll look for the clarity hidden inside uncertainty. Welcome to The Uncertainty Edge. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Amy Dupree, an expert on life transitions, aging, caregiving, and family dynamics, and the founder of LifeMap and the Trusted Advisor of Choice program. With a doctorate in social work and over 30 years of experience working with thousands of financial advisors and their clients across North America, Amy has made it her mission to help advisors bridge the gap between financial planning and the human side of their clients' lives. Her work challenges a fundamental assumption in our industry, that knowing the numbers is enough. Get ready for a conversation about empathy, longevity, and the art of asking better questions. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam. A pleasure to be here with you.
Delighted to have you. And I think this is a very timely conversation, given all of the things that we hear about AI and the future of advice. Let me start by asking you to talk a little bit about your path to becoming a key voice in financial services. The doctorate in social work, your work with BMO and Scotia, and eventually training thousands of advisors across North America. Please, can you walk us through that journey and the moment you realized that the financial industry needed what you had to offer?
Yes, thanks, Sam. Well, I had the great pleasure of starting my career in financial services. I was well into my career at this point as a keynote speaker, and a keynote speaker for financial organizations who were wanting to do not just client appreciation events, but business building events. And we did them around the topics of things like retirement reimagined, and one on estate planning and caregiving, and another one that was particularly geared to people going through different life transitions. And what my role was, obviously, was to talk about the life side, but then to connect it with the financial. And what happened, Sam, was at each of those events, I would stay at the reception till the last client left. And I said it was like having a focus group every time I spoke.
Right.
And what I started to hear from the clients were all the things that they weren't happy about with their advisors. And I started to hear consistent patterns. And what I knew was that those things were very fixable, but that the advisors weren't aware because the clients weren't telling them, they were telling me. And I believed that I could make an impact with the advisors. And so we created corollary events, speaking events for the advisors on each of those topics. And what would happen is they'd come up to me at the end and say, that was great. How do I actually get into that conversation? How do I say that? And that's how all of that work evolved into the Trusted Advisor of Choice program, which is all based around life transitions and how do you talk to clients about the life side, connect it to the money, move back and forth with these conversations. And I've had over 2,500 advisors go through that program now. So I've had a lot of feedback about how helpful that is. But my mission is really to help advisors deepen their relationships with clients, have more fun in their practice, and of course, better serve their clients all at the same time.
Now that resonates. And I think that every advisor listening to this is probably nodding their head to say, look, I want to be that trusted advisor. I'm dealing with clients that are going through these transitions. So far, so good.
Right.
But most advisors are probably thinking that, look, I'm not a therapist. So when it
Right.
comes to life conversations, what is my role in here as their financial advisor? How do you help them make that mindset shift from being the expert with the answer, being that therapist, say, lie down on my couch, to being the person who asks the right questions, especially when there may be no clear answer or resolution at the end of the meeting?
Yeah, I love that, and I love what you said, Sam. Because the truth is, when my team and I created Trusted Advisor, we had two things we were speaking to because I knew that advisor said this. We have no time, so these life
Right, right.
conversations, we can't get into all this. We barely have time to have our meetings, and I'm not a therapist. And what I used to say, we designed it to be very tight and not take time. But then when I say to always say to advisors, you don't have to be a therapist. Matter of fact, your client's not looking for you to be a therapist. All you have to do is be a connected human being, and you're already that. I'm just going to show you how to do that a little bit better than what you're already doing. So it's taking the skills you already have and amplifying those skills. And one of the ways that we do that is by by kind of reframing as clients are going through different transitions with the advisor, to think about that every life transition has four implications: practical, emotional, family, and financial. The advisor only has to be an expert in the financial. We're not saying you got to be an expert in all of these. But to your point, you have to recognize the client is going through all of those things. They live in the practical, emotional, family as much as the financial. So as an advisor, you have to figure out how to go to where the client is, express empathy, and I want to come back and chat with you more about empathy,
Mhm.
and then go back to the financial conversation. So it's this dance between the life and the money, and we created a framework for that called LIRA on how to do that.
And I want to explore the LIRA framework in a bit of detail and talk about
Mm-hmm.
empathy. But I think you mentioned a couple of, to me, a really key point. So this connected human being that the advisor should be that, and this dance between the other aspects of the life and the financial. And I suspect that every advisor listening to this is going to nod, because in my experience, the financial element is simply the nuts and bolts manifestation of all of the other parts of your life, right? So
Right.
whatever is going on, like the whole idea of a financial plan or an investment strategy that the advisor is creating for their client is a way of putting into practice what is important to them on their personal or their family or their other things that are going on. So this dance that you're talking about is not such a far-fetched stretch for the advisor to go through, because in order for them to do their job properly as a financial advisor, they need to understand what the personal lens the client is bringing to this equation, what the family lens that they're bringing to the equation. And you're just providing that framework, if you will, to kind of, and permission, if you will, to sit there and say, I'm not being forward if I ask
That's
this
right.
client more questions about their personal circumstances or the family circumstance.
I love that. And what you just said is so key, because what I say to advisors is you probably do this more naturally than you even realize. We're just going to name it so that when you have the framework, it's easier to refer back to it, or to think, okay, I missed this. I need to go back and do that. So it's a very natural process, which is why I think advisors have resonated so much with advisors, that Lyra was just, oh yeah, I can do that. One of the fears is, if I have these life conversations, we're going to go down rabbit holes, and I don't know if I'm qualified to even have this conversation. So what we work through all that sort of thing too.
And to be fair, I suspect it's a natural, and I would say it's reassuring that the advisor has that kind of concern, because they
Yes,
are motivated to being professional, to doing a good job.
right.
But it's not. I suspect it's probably not much different than an advisor getting into a conversation, and there's some arcane tax point that the client brings up, and the advisor then isn't in a position to say, "Oh, well, I'll give you tax advice." They shouldn't be doing that, but they will
Right.
say,
Let's
"Look,
hope.
there's an issue that we've identified here. I suggest that you take it up with your tax advisor, and if you don't have a trusted tax advisor that you can call, we'll be able to connect you with a few people that we work with on these problems." And you're just giving them yet another, I guess, tool to kind of explore the key levers that client is using and get the client to kind of acknowledge for themselves and to the advisor that this is an issue. And where it gets too deep and where the advisor can't address the issue in detail, it's at least enough to flag that this might be an issue and you should probably go talk to somebody for greater professional guidance in this area, right?
Yeah, and we could talk about how do you do that? Because I think that is a fear. I think the mindset of I don't have to be all things to all people, but I have to recognize what my client's going through in a way that is authentic and makes them feel like, I the word empathy, often people think, oh, empathy, it's very soft. And by the way, I like what Simon Sinek says about, he doesn't talk about soft skills, he talks about human skills. And everything I do, I say, these are just human skills. Because I think when we say soft skills, it diminishes the importance of them. But in my mind, empathy is just the idea of conveying to your client, I see you, I hear you, and I understand you. Okay, I see you, I hear you, I understand you. Now, what's interesting about this, Sam, is there's this research I sometimes refer to where this came out of, I believe it was FP Canada. I hope I'm quoting that right. But they interviewed financial planners and their clients, so the same group, and they asked them the question, do you do this with your client? Do you base their financial plans on their values, goals? It was all kind of the human side stuff of this. And the advisor said, yes, we do at about 90%, and the client said, no, you don't. That's not true, but they said it at about half the amount that the advisors did. And here's what my takeaway is: it's not that the advisors are wrong. The advisors are doing a lot of those things, but what they're not doing, here's the gap that needs to be closed. They're not conveying it in a way to their client where it lands on the client, where the client gets that they've done that. So it's almost like it's going on internally in the advisor, but it's how you communicate to the client and how you respond to the client that makes them feel that you've really gotten them. That's the key. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I already do this, I believe you do, but does your client feel it? And when I say that, it doesn't mean no. Again, empathy is not this touchy-feely thing. It's about saying to somebody, I get you. That's it. I get you. And I want you to know I get you.
Look, I love that. I love that distinction between that gap. And I wholeheartedly agree that that probably occurs. And I think maybe I can take it one more step and we'll get on to
Sure.
your framework in a minute. I would say that it's, I get you, I understand you. I think it's, perhaps we're putting names on it about, empathy or soft skills or whatever. It's just being the type of person, it's a bit of a version of the golden rule. It's being the type of
Yes.
person that you would like to be. If you were sitting in the chair of that client and they're telling you about their challenges, their problems, their life aspirations, how would you want the person sitting in the chair across from you to be responding to it?
Absolutely.
Are you there? Are you relating? Are you empathizing? And I think there's a part of it that is, I love the part of the gap that you're talking about and communicating it in a way that the client understands. And one, I think natural, but perhaps neglected by advisors in many cases, way of doing that is when the client is talking about a circumstance or a situation or a challenge that they're having. A good way to demonstrate, for an advisor to demonstrate that they're understanding, that they're empathizing, is to kind of share, without getting too deep into it, a situation that they or somebody close to them has faced similar to that. And it's not taking attention away from the client. It is simply saying to the client that I understand what you're doing. I've seen this happen. You're not alone. And I think that demonstrates that human nature. Look, I think this is a human business. And
Yes,
I hope that in 2026, advisors recognize that and embrace it, because if they don't, I think this thing called AI is going to eat their lunch. I think the one thing that is
it is.
differentiating the advisors that you and I deal with, Amy, is simply the fact that they are human, that they can empathize, and
Right.
that the client at the other side of the table can relate to them on a human level,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Can I add to something you said there? Because I loved it. What I always say, because sometimes advisors will say, well, I'm afraid to share my story because it's first of all, it makes you vulnerable when you share, but vulnerability is what connects us.
Correct.
So that's key. But the second part is the way I suggest people do that is share your story. Like maybe it's about, it could be anything from when you became a new parent and you're dealing with a young client sitting in front of you, or it could be the death of a parent. That's a common, that's a life transition that I don't think we give enough importance to when our parents pass. And so after you share your story, the great way to get the client back engaged is just to say something like, how is it for you? This is what I went through. What's it like for you right now? Because what you're doing then is pulling them back into the conversation and putting the focus back on them. So it becomes then a very natural exchange, right?
That's great.
I use the example of both my parents have passed, and um, I know that when people lose a parent, it rocks their world. It almost always does. And so I'll say to them, boy, I remember when my mom passed, that first year for me was really tough. How is it for you? How is it for you? What's it like for you? Anything like that gets people then feeling like, okay, I can actually have a conversation.
I think that's a great example and that's great advice, Amy. I think vulnerability is key. And I think, again, that is levels of it, right? You can be vulnerable without being you can be
Right.
vulnerable and still be professional, right?
Right.
Without
So,
it
Sam,
being
what I don't say about my mother is, oh my gosh, every time I thought about it, I just saw, there's a level that you share, right?
correct.
It was a
Look,
tough year
I
for me,
had
is
an
what I
old
say.
boss that used to tell me when I was first leading and running teams is that we all have three personas, okay, which is the public persona, the private persona, and the really private persona. If you are in
I like
any
that.
kind of profession that where you are interacting or dealing with people, you have to show an element of your private persona because that's who they're engaging with. But that really private persona is something that is left for your family and your close,
That's right.
right?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Now, let's go on to we've kind of been teasing this framework of yours, Amy, the LIRA framework: listen, empathize, reassure, and act. It's a framework that you developed to help advisors have that more meaningful life conversation with the client. Can you talk a little bit about that? What problem
Sure.
you were trying to solve, and what does it look like when an advisor applies this framework in the right way?
Well, first of all, Sam, I always say everything I do is pretty simple because it's great if I can do it, but the goal is for the advisors to be able to do it in an easy, natural way. And to answer your question about what were we solving for, we were solving for exactly what you said in the beginning. The idea it takes too much time and I'm not a therapist. So, okay, you already connected human being advisor. What I'm just going to show you this and it'll help you do the dance we talked about. So when we talk about listen, we're talking about, we all know, we've all gone through listening classes, but I like to talk about listening in three levels. So level one is listening to the content or
Mhm.
excuse me, listening, no, that's wrong. It's listening to reply. Sorry. Listening to reply. And we all know we're not supposed to do this and we all do it. And it's actually a professional hazard because as a professional, we're doing it to add value. So what we're doing is listen, okay, I got to jump in here and, say something intelligent. I got to offer something here. So you're going to do that. You're just going to postpone that jumping in to do that. Level two listening is listening to the content, obviously better. You're focused in on what the person's saying. Level three is listening to what's behind the content. So I want to give you an example, Sam, because I saw this in action, the difference between two and three. And three is where the magic happens. So
Mhm.
I I was coaching an advisor who was a really good advisor and had great relationships with her clients. She asked me to sit in on this one client meeting, and the client was a retired 72-year-old woman whose husband wasn't in the meeting, but they had nice rapport and things started well. And then they did a portfolio review, they did some planning, and then something happened at the end of the meeting that was key. The meeting ran longer than I think the advisor had planned for, in which she was pushed on time. And so I watched her very quietly as they're having kind of ending conversations, folding up her papers, getting kind of ready to leave. And at that moment, the client said, very deadpan, I'm going to Italy to see my mom. Now, you will remember I told you this client was 72 years
Yeah.
old, right? So her mom's got to be pretty old. So The advisor responded at level 2, and she said, have a great time. When you get back, we're going to review such and such. Okay, now that was great that she did respond to the content, but I had been brought in the meeting enough that I said to the client, how's your mom? And she kind of dropped her head. She said, she's not well. She has dementia. I'm not sure she's going to recognize me. And I think this will probably be the last time I see my mother. And I said, oh, I can't imagine how hard this trip is. She said, it's one of the hardest things I've done. That's the difference between 2 and 3. So in that moment, I got the deeper connection with the client, the advisor. So we can't listen at level 3 all the time. This is what I always say. We'd be exhausted. But you have to listen at the moments that matter. And you have to be tuned in, because that's a key moment. Before I go on, do you want to say something there, Sam?
No, I love that, Amy. I think that's such a powerful example that you've shared. And it is, as you say, there's nothing wrong with what the advisor did.
No.
It is just a missed opportunity, right? And I think it reminds me of what you've just said. And I think what the client experienced in your exchange is that old saying attributed to Maya Angelou's, long after people forget what you said, they remember how you made them feel.
100%.
And I think that how you made that client feel and how that advisor could have made that client feel could have made all the difference in the world, right?
Yeah, because they had a good relationship, right? It wasn't like she didn't know the client, so she just missed an opportunity. So what I encourage people to do, Sam, is to spend one day going through the world from the moment you put your feet on the floor to get back into bed at night, observing how people listen to you at what level and how you feel based on that. Because you'll get a sense when people are just responding to you, or when they're listening to your content, or when they're really listening at a different level. It's a great way. And then I say reverse that. And then the next day, observe yourself about how you listen with each encounter and how people react to you. And, I love to do this in the grocery store when they're checking out my groceries. A lot of these people just ignore the clerk, right? Or they say hi, and that's it. I'll say, wow, it's really busy in here today. You must be tired or something. They look up, they're so shocked, right? And they say, and then they'll tell me their whole life story. But it's so easy to engage people when we just do listen at a different level and focus in like that, right? And of course, that goes hand in hand with the next step, which is empathy. And you heard my empathic response was just to say, wow, I can't imagine how hard this trip's going to be. Less is more with empathy. You don't have to come up with something clever to say. It's authenticity. It's just what you said. We are, I believe, more than ever, in the midst of what's happening globally, in the midst of AI, we are seeking authenticity and connection. And the more we can just be that, the more people want to be around us, and they want to do work with us, and they trust us. So empathy is simple. And if your client catches you off guard with some horrible news or something, you can say, I don't even know what to say right now. I just want you to know I'm so sorry you're going through this. That's an authentic response.
Look, I think I love the exercise that you talked about. I think that's something I'm going to try. I think that the observation that you make that this is tough. Look, I also think in the world of technology and in the world of social media and all of the curation, I think we're making it tougher than we have to be. Like, we think that we have to be perfect, and I think what you just talked about is it's being authentic, not perfection, right? And and look, I'm not trying to pretend that it's easy, but I always try to remind myself that how would I want to show up for a close friend of mine that is telling me this story? Or how would I want a close friend of mine to show up for me when that is there? And it's maybe taking it a little too far to say to an advisor that, your clients are your best friends.
Right.
In the context, it is a good mental model to get into, to sit there and say, okay, how am I supposed to react in this situation? Well, how would you want your friend to react if you were in that situation, right?
And again, we're just trying to convey to the person, I see you, I get you. That's all we're doing, right? So whatever it takes to do that is okay. And I know people think, oh, I don't want to overstep. You're not overstepping to acknowledge somebody's feelings, to acknowledge that's again, AI, I know they're programming in empathic sort of responses. It's not quite the same when it comes from Claude than it is when it comes from you,
Yeah,
Sam.
as I say, like it's the bedside manner, Claude, right?
Yeah,
There. Like
yeah.
I'm
I'm
not
like,
sure that
okay.
is going to.
It's like that's too much. Stop that. This is just like, hey, I'm here with you and I get it.
Right.
And then so that's listen and empathize. Reassure is a step that you don't always have to do, but you can only do it after empathy, or it feels like you're discounting the person. And this is the stage where it's a little bit of the cheerleader stage, where you're saying you're not alone. I want you to know this isn't you're not unusual. What's interesting, Sam, and I say this from my career as in social work and working with families as well, is that when we're going through something, even when it's common, we feel alone. And so what you're conveying is, I see this. I see. So you may say somebody's going through a divorce, and you say, "I'm so sorry that you're having to deal with this." And then you may talk about the fact that you've had a number of clients who've gone through this and come out the other side, and after they get out this period, things really do improve. Like something kind of, again, you don't have to go on, and you don't always have to do this step. But if you see the person feels alone, widows often feel this, and yet we know it's not an uncommon life transition. And so then after you do that, now the goal is now you want to segue to the business conversation. And this again isn't a one-time segue, it's back and forth. But the segue is to me the most important part. So um, I said divorce, so let's talk about that for a minute. Clients shared with you, and you've done the first few steps. You might say something to the effect of, you know, John or Mary or whomever, as I'm listening to you, and we're talking about this. Some things are occurring to me that we should probably review on a financial side too. So before I share those things, do you have something financially that you really want to make sure we cover today? So it's a gentle segue, and you can do it several times, like, oh, another financial thing just occurred to me, or another thing in your plan we should probably review, or I wonder if you've thought about this. They know why they're there. They're there for financial, but what you've demonstrated in the first few steps is you care about them and you see them. And so you can bounce back and forth with that. And then how I like to end, if you're working with clients, is say, as you're dealing with all of these things, I'm going to walk beside you around the financial. I'll be here to do this. And what I hope is us doing that together frees you up so that you have more energy to do the other things. So it's a nice way to kind of position yourself as, I love the words, I'm going to walk beside you. It's not too touchy feely to say that to a client.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to walk beside you as you go through this. And you can call me anytime, right? About this, I've got your back on this financial side. And my goal is, I see you've got all this other, I want to free you up to do that other stuff. So what do you think about that, Sam?
I like that. I think that's great. I think you're absolutely right. I think I think what particularly resonated what you say is that the client knows why they're there. They're not
Yeah,
there for you to be their financial therapist or their counselor
right.
or whatever. Sorry, their personal therapist or their counselor or whatever. But they're human. So they're going to tell you a little bit about how they feel, the problems that they're going through, etc. And you would be less than human if you didn't acknowledge that human side of them. But again, it's that walking that fine line between acknowledging their personal situation and then bringing it back to the problem for you to solve, right? Or how you can help. And I don't think it's unnatural. It's just, and I dare suspect that most advisors do a lot of this without even thinking about it, right?
100%. They do it. Yep.
You're just giving them, I think, the tools and the framework to be more comfortable doing this without thinking that they have to be that the social worker or that psychologist or psychiatrist or family counselor or whatever they have to be. It's just being that empathetic, good listener that understands the pain or challenge that the client is going through, right?
Absolutely. And sometimes advisors will say, well, what if the client really starts breaking down and crying and going through, and I don't quite know what to do with that. The truth is, people know why they're there. I've never heard of a client who fell on the floor crying and couldn't was sobbing, and if they're struggling a little bit, you can say, how about if I give you a moment and I'll get you, would you like a glass of water or a cup of coffee, and I'll be back in just a couple of minutes. You take your time, and please, it's totally okay. Of course, you're going through a hard time. Of course, you're upset. And when you leave the room, the client's going to pull themselves back together, So I think, but saying to them, it's okay, and I'll give you a minute if it's going on longer than you think they're having trouble, because clients don't want to sit in our offices and cry, right? They don't want to do that either, so they'll be glad for that.
Now, you talked about divorce and widows, so let's stay on that topic for a moment. Your research and experience points to a pretty striking statistic, if I'm quoting it correctly. 70 to 80% of women leave their advisor within the first year of losing a spouse.
Yeah, that's
So
actually not mine. I just want to say that's not my research. That's actually pretty consistent research that comes out, and it's been consistent for years now.
So with that consistent research, what are advisors still getting wrong in how they're engaging with women clients? And what does it actually look like to build a relationship with both partners?
Love this. So you want to be relevant to both people in the couple. And so, first of all, we have to stop seeing and thinking that women are not engaged in finances. I always say whether the woman is the CFO of the family or she's not engaged in the finance, so the whole range, likely she's engaged in the life of the family. And
Right.
so, and
Right.
if she's single, because we have lots of single people, she's engaged in those aspects of her life. So one of the mistakes I think that we've made in financial services historically is to silo money and not connect it to life. And what we know from other research is women want, when they're investing, what's important to them is that it's for something. So there's research that shows that men can be happy just watching the numbers tick up. And by the way, these are generalizations, right?
Yeah.
Not all men are like that, and some women are like that. But especially women like to say, okay, so this money is connected to whether it's my retirement, my kids' education, taking my kids on grandkids on a trip, whatever. So this idea of life and money going hand in hand, which is something I love to say, and I can't say it without putting my hands together, but it is the thing that when you want to work with women, you want to make sure that you're being relevant in having these life conversations and tying the money to something. We hear all sorts of stuff, and I still hear it from women that they feel their advisors are condescending.
Mm-hmm.
Or so I think watching that, I think when you're sitting with a couple, and if you have, and I'm going to stereotype here for a second, again, it could be the exact opposite of what I'm saying, but if you have a husband who's kind of dominating the conversation and he's the one more engaged in this, it's easy to direct everything to him.
Right.
And so you've got to be the ringleader to be able to turn to the wife and say, I want to hear what you think about this. How does this fit with where you want your financial future to go? And what I like to say, advisors, is if it's a new client, new couple, start right from the beginning with saying, it's really important that I hear from both of you that you're engaged in this, because you can talk about, this is about not just about your money, it's about your life. And so both of you are going to be interested in that. Then you have to follow through. Now, if you've been working with a couple for 20 years and you really don't have a relationship with the woman, that's going to take a little while. And I say, Sam, we're so big on let's get referrals. I say, why don't you sit down with your book of business and see what clients you don't have a deep enough relationship with, especially the women, given this stat. So, and I've had advisors say, well, I never lose widows and they stay with me. Great. Maybe you're doing everything right. But I'd still look at that book of business and say, who might be at risk? Because I know them, but they don't come to meetings. Well, the reason people don't come to meetings is they're not relevant. And maybe instead of doing a long review of everything, you need to ask, what is it that you want? I always say, the joke I'll say is, are you the type of person who wants to know how the watch is made or what time it is? I am somebody who only wants to know what time it is. So I had to say to my advisor, you're giving me way too much detail. I'm not interested. I get it. I get the top line. I don't need and a lot of times advisors do that because they want to they want to make sure their clients are educated and but you got to ask your client, how much do you want in this?
Right.
Sam, I think you want to jump in here. I don't want to
No.
going on. I'm
I'm
on a
just
soapbox
nodding.
now.
I was nodding, smiling, and all of that as you were talking, because there's so much to unpack here. I mean, your point about advisors that say, well, I don't lose clients. it always sort of makes me smile a little bit, because I guess the stats are wrong then. When the stats across all advisors say that
Yeah,
80% of women leave, that you don't have it. But in my own experience, and again, behavioral research says this, that we tend to believe that we're above average on all
yeah,
things, when statistically it's impossible to be, to be above average. Like, I think there was the famous study that 70% of drivers believe that they're above
I
average.
was
Well,
just thinking that. I
yeah,
was just thinking about that.
not
I've
possible,
ridden,
right?
I don't know about you, Sam, but I've ridden in some of those other cars.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But I think, to your point, I love this connection that to kind of, again, generalizing or stereotyping. And if we tie it back to the earlier part of the conversation, let's keep that generalization that the woman part of the couple is not interested in the financial aspects. We talked about being human. We talked about things that are going on in their life. And I think this is a perfect opportunity for an advisor to kind of engage with that component of that's what you're saying, to engage with that component and interact with the spouse, the woman in the client relationship in that way. So yes, they're not interested in whether the how the portfolio is doing or whether it's beaten the benchmark, but they are interested in whether their kids are going to get the education that they're looking, that they're planning for, or their retirement is planned for it right that way or not. And I think where an advisor can build that rapport and that connection is to tweak it from talking about numbers and finances to talking about outcomes and
Yes.
what the desires are, right? The state of being that the woman might want in this case. What does retirement look like? Where is she? What are they doing? How are they interacting? What is the relationship with her husband, with her partner, with her kids, whatever it is? I don't think that is, again, that's not inconsistent with everything else that we're talking about, the LIRA framework that you've
That's right.
espoused, the idea that we need to be the human advisor on the other side of the table. We need to be able to talk about what the money is for and not just about the money itself.
Yeah. And then I think people say to me, well, what if you've got, and it could be again, either way in this couple, like one of my dearest friends is a CFO of a company. She's the one who's running the money and the husband's less involved. If you've got a couple in front of you and it's likely they have different levels, one wants to know how the watch is made and the other one just wants to know the time, acknowledge that, and you can actually run the meeting that way. You can start with meeting the needs of the person who wants less,
Right.
and then you can say, we're going to go now and talk about how the watch is made. You don't have to, you don't have to be tortured by this conversation. Have her go get a cup, or him get a cup of coffee or do something, so that they're not dreading every time they have to come meet with you. And you got to do this and not be condescending, like, oh, you don't care enough. But no, you have different needs. And you can normalize this because you can say most couples are like this. Most couples, one wants to know more than the other. And I try not to torture the one who doesn't want all this detail, right? This is the authenticity piece.
I
And
love that.
if you've done that and you've met the needs of the person who wants to know the outcomes, then you can sit and go into that deep conversation that you're just dying to have with someone.
And I think, to your point, it's as simple as acknowledging and framing it, right? You're not necessarily asking the person that doesn't want to go deep to say, as you say, but it's important not to be condescending. You're not saying
Right.
to them, you can leave the room right now, let the adult
No.
speak. It's
Right.
You're
That's key.
saying, like, look, this is going into a level of detail that I know your partner wants and that you don't enjoy it. So I'm giving you permission in a way to, tune out for the next 10 minutes
Right.
while I'm
Play
talking.
Wordle.
And chime in where you want. I'm not trying to exclude you. I'm just
Right.
acknowledging the fact that this is not your cup of tea, right?
So now what happens if you're listening to this and you've had a couple for 20 years and you haven't done this and you don't really have a great relationship with one of the spouses? What you can do is acknowledge that. You can just be and say, as I've looked at this, I realize I haven't made the meetings relevant for you. And so what I'd like to do is fix that because it's really important you're both here. And if they're moving through life, you can say, especially as you move through midlife and beyond, it's important that that you both are understanding what's going on and are engaged. And so own it, put the blame on yourself to some degree, like, hey, I realize I haven't done as good a job on this. I want to fix it. Would you please come in so we can talk about how we can make this relevant? Because often advisors are like, okay, well, I can do this with a new client, but I've got clients I've had 20, 30 years and the wife's never shown up. And how do I get her in the room now? And what I say is try to tie it to a life conversation, a life stage. So if they're nearing retirement, you can say, as you get closer to retirement, it's even more important that we come together, all of us, because there's some things I want to talk about. And then you got to make it relevant, and you got to talk about life, not just money. So that's how
I
you
love
can
that.
do it.
I think
Yeah.
that's very good advice. Now, let's talk about retirement. You mentioned, and I think a lot of us think of it this way, as not as a single event, but as a journey with multiple chapters. And you've noted that many people are aging in a world that no longer exists. And the
Mm-hmm.
way I characterize it is that it's been romanticized, if you will, that you get the gold watch, you walk out, or you're golfing for the rest of your life. And I think that is an outdated model. We're living longer, we're more accomplished in many ways. And the way I put it is that I think it's very, very hard to expect somebody that has worked for 30 plus years at 40 plus hours a week, where their entire sense of purpose, accomplishment, their entire social network, their entire calendar is dominated around that job, whether they liked it or not, and then say to them, well, it's Friday, thank you very much for that service. And, you expect that person on Monday to figure out what to do with the rest of their life, right? As I say, even if
100%.
you've dreamt about golfing or traveling for your entire working life, I suspect that 98% of people, even if they can do it after 6 months of traveling the world or after 6 months of golfing 5 days a week, that they get
Yeah.
sick of it. So how
100%.
should advisors be challenging those assumptions? And what does a more honest retirement conversation sound like today?
Well, I always love to remind people where this concept of retirement came from, which is from 1883. And in 1883, the Chancellor of Germany, Chancellor von Bismarck, was trying to keep the socialists out of Germany. And one of his strategies was he created the first national pension plan for men, of course, because that's who was working at that time. And he set the retirement age at 65. That's where we got 65 from. And I always joke that von Bismarck was a pretty smart guy, because average life expectancy in Germany in 1883 was 47 years old.
Right.
So now think about this, because we've now gained, as gerontologists, we call this a longevity bonus of 30 years in the last century, right? We're up around 80. It's not give or take. Well, you look at that, and our thinking hasn't evolved all that much, right? Because we still think 65, whether we do it at 65 or not, that's the common answer people will give of what's a common age to retire. And so as advisors, you've got to help reframe this conversation. First of all, telling that story can get people going, oh yeah, because we need to stop talking about it as one long stage. And I always say, I do a lot of retirement workshops, retirement reimagined, and I'll say, so I talk about it in 3 chapters, but there's nothing magical about 3. It could be 6, it could be 9. But there's no other time in our life where we think about 20 or 30 years as one stage of our life.
Right.
This happened, this happened. So as an advisor, you got to frame the conversation differently. And I think really the industry is moving towards longevity planning versus retirement planning, which I think is brilliant. I'm with you. I think retirement is oversold. I think if the book I want to write is Retirement is a Lie, because I know what happens for people. So when you look at this, if you talk about, I want to make sure that we're doing longevity planning, which means that both your life and your money go the distance, right? Now we're having a different conversation. And so, because we want to be able to talk not just about those first 3 to 5 years, when often for people it's like the lids come off and they're running around golfing and vacationing and they're living like they're on vacation. And then often there's a second phase they get into where it's though this is it phase. Now what? Right? And some people start that right from the beginning and they're kind of like, okay, I thought this was going to be more fun, but I've lost my structure, I've lost my identity, I don't have the people I hung out with, I'm not seeing. So my sense of purpose, all the things you said. So I think as an advisor, if you structure it around longevity, if you talk about early, mid, late, and that you want to make sure you've got the life and the money to go the distance, you're now having a different conversation. And it also helps you frame those later conversations that you need to be having around potential care needs in the future, and making sure, and these are the words I like to talk about, I want to make sure that you have choice, control, and independence throughout your life and the quality of life that you want forever. You say that and people sit up in their chair and they're like, yes, I want that too. Okay, then is it okay if we talk about this as beyond just the first few years of your retirement?
I love that. I love that. And I think you're right. I think it's a really aha point when you encapsulate it. There's no other event that we plan for 20 years at one shot. And I do think that this transition is unique in the sense that we treat it, in my view, we treat it as financial, where no other
Right.
transition do we actually sit there. Like if you go from high school to university, it's not just a financial, it's a life transition. When you graduate, it's not just starting a career, it's a whole life transition.
Yes.
We've got all sorts of programs and setups for it, or when you get married, or when you buy your house, or when you have a kid, all of these things that we have. Retirement is just one of those things that always sort of happens, and with a
And
lot
yet we
less
plan
band.
financially. I love that. You okay if I steal that line, Sam? I've never heard that before, but that's a beautiful, you're absolutely right. It is the only transition we do that.
In that line, part of that transition and thinking about a 20-year time period, in my book, my latest book, The Uncertainty Edge, I talk about how leaders who thrive aren't the ones who avoid uncertainty. They're the ones who built a foundation to
Mm,
navigate it with clarity and confidence. Now, for clients who are staring down a major life transition, like retirement, like caregiving, like loss of a spouse, the uncertainty more than anything else can feel paralyzing.
yes.
Advisors
Yeah.
are tempted to kind of give answers that are reassuring and that show their professionalism. How do they do that? How do they reassure a client while acknowledging the fact that the future is inherently uncertain and unpredictable? Like, we've got a plan, we're going to prepare. I'm going to walk by your side, as you
Yeah.
say, etc., and we'll figure it out together. We've set, I guess, how do they do that
Yeah.
balance between saying we don't have all the answers, but we're in a good place?
Well, you just did a beautiful job doing it. I think it is the idea of being authentic. Sometimes, advisors are often hesitant, I find, to have the conversations about you might need care someday. And so what I say is you can be real with them and say, I want to talk about something that sometimes is tricky to talk about. It isn't always fun, but I care about you. And that's why I want to
Mm,
have this
mhm,
conversation.
mhm.
I think when you frame it, I care about you. I want to make sure you have a great life forever. And that's why I want to have this conversation that isn't always easy. Is that okay with you? People come along with you in that, right? Because you've put a frame around it. Do
I
you like
like
that,
that.
Sam, or not? Yeah.
No, I really like that. And I think especially if you can tie that in with saying the reason I bring it up, Amy, is because I've just been dealing with other clients that have had similar
Yes.
issues. And while it might not apply to you, it did give me thought that it's something that we should talk about, right?
I love that. And that's because that goes back, Sam, to the okay, we haven't talked about this. Why am I bringing it up now? Because you can say, as we're moving through this kind of planning, or I've had several clients lately where this has become relevant, and now I'm going back and talking to all my clients. So if you're hesitant, you're thinking they're going to think, well, why did they wait this long? That's all you need is an entry like that. And then I think we can acknowledge uncertainty, but reassurance is I'm going to be here for you, which is the thing AI can never do, right? So I'm going to be here with you. We're going to do longevity planning together. Obviously, we can't know the future, but what we can do is set things up in the best way possible
Right.
and know that we can adapt as needed as time goes on.
And I think that's the key part, right? Like, we set the foundation in place together, that we're as well prepared as we can be, but we acknowledge the fact that we have to be able to adapt, and we will be ready to do it together when the time comes, right?
That's right. And I'm going to be here. Or if you're nearing retirement, because clients are worried
Right.
about this too, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's going to happen? Talk about your succession plan. Talk about who your team is. Talk about how your organization is going to be there, whatever it is. But give them that reassurance. Don't ignore that part of the equation too, because we know advisors are aging as well.
Well, that's great. Well, Amy, we're coming to the end of our podcast. So I have a few final rapid fire questions for you that I ask all my
Okay.
guests.
Okay, good.
So, number one, professionally, what is the most important lesson you've learned over the years?
Well, it almost plays off of what we just talked about. I believe we all have to keep learning, growing, and adapting, or we're no longer relevant. And that's true for me in the work I do. I'm always thinking about that, but it's true for the advisor too. You can't keep doing new things the way you used to do them because the world is changing. AI is just one example of that. When we talk about next gen, we know they want different things. And everything we talked about, by the way, is a conduit to get next gen in the room. We could have a whole other show on that. But so I say keep learning, growing, and know you're going to have to adapt. And that's just part of staying relevant.
No, I love that. I wholeheartedly agree. And I would add one more thing. It's also what makes it fun, right? If you've been doing it for 30 years
Yeah,
and you're still kind of just on a lather,
autopilot.
rinse, repeat, it's
Yeah.
not fun, right? You're learning something in the process. Number two, Amy, what is one practical tip you would offer listeners keen on applying your insights?
Empathy first, solution second. Empathy first, solution second. So you're going to have financial solutions. Hold them until you do the empathy. So, I have advisors who put empathy first, solution second on their desk as a reminder to them. It's one of the most practical things you can do.
I love it. I love it. And especially for type A, numbers driven people, I used to tell all the CFAs I used to hire that first you have to speak to the heart of your client before you can start speaking to the head. So
That's
stop
right.
talking
That's
about
great.
standard deviations and everything until you've shown them that you actually care about their money and who they are. Amy, this has been a fantastic conversation. If listeners want to learn more about you or your work, where do they go?
Well, we have a giveaway, Sam,
Okay.
and they can go to LifeBridge Strategies, all one word, lifebridgestrategies.ca/giveaway. And what this giveaway is on talking about caregiving and planning with your client. So it's something you can utilize right away. And then that's the same place you can go to lifebridgestrategies.ca just generally if you want to see more about my work. Would love to have a conversation with anybody. Would love people to link in with me. You can link in with me. I would love that. And we post something every Monday called Monday Mindset that has a lot of these sort of ideas that are just kind of bite-sized that you can implement in your practice.
Amazing. I'm sure that the listeners will get a lot of value out of that giveaway. And for listeners, it will be in the show notes, the link that Amy just mentioned. Amy, thank you for joining us today on the Uncertainty Edge podcast.
Thank you, Sam. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you. It was delightful.
Oh, it was a fun conversation. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
In this episode of the Uncertainty Edge podcast, I spoke with Dr. Amy Dupree, founder of LifeMap and the Trusted Advisor of Choice program, about why the most future-ready advisors are the ones who master the human side of their clients' lives, not just the financial side. Here are my 3 key takeaways. Number 1, you don't have to be a therapist. You just have to be human. Amy's LIRA framework, listen, empathize, reassure, act, gives advisors a simple, practical structure for navigating life conversations without overstepping. The goal isn't to fix every emotional situation. It's to convey to your client, I see you, I hear you, I understand you. Advisors who embrace that mindset don't just retain clients, they become irreplaceable. Number 2, the gap is in the communication, not the caring. Research shows that advisors believe they're connecting with clients on a human level, far more than clients actually feel they are. The insight here is that good intentions aren't enough. The connection has to land. Small adjustments like listening at a deeper level or pausing before jumping to a solution can close that gap and transform a transactional relationship into a trusted one. Number 3, retirement is the only life transition we plan for financially, but not humanly. Amy made a point that I have been thinking about for a while. Retirement is the only major life transition we treat purely as a financial event. Every other milestone, marriage, parenthood, a new career, is understood as a full life change. Reframing retirement as longevity planning and having honest conversations about identity, purpose, and the chapters ahead is one of the most valuable services an advisor can offer today. Amy reminds us that in a world increasingly shaped by AI, the advisors who will thrive are those who lean into what technology can never replicate: genuine human connection, empathy, and the courage to ask better questions. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Uncertainty Edge. If today's conversation sparked something, subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You'll get practical tools, deeper insights, and new episodes every other Tuesday. Please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also subscribe to the newsletter at theuncertaintyedge.com.